I used to think silence was peaceful. That night I learned it can also have teeth. It was a Thursday in late October, one of those evenings that smells of burnt coffee and rain-soaked leaves. The hallway light in my old house kept flickering. The way old things warn you they're tired. I'd just come back from the dry cleaner with my brother's grey coat folded across my arm, a coat I still couldn't give away. I bent to hang it when I heard voices. My children's voices, low, steady, serious. At first, I thought I'd misheard. My daughter, Emily, almost never whispered. She inherited her mother's volume, God rest her soul. But this was a whisper meant to hide, not to protect. "We'll sell both apartments before he even knows what's going on," she said. The sound of it, my name folded into the word sell, cut through me like cold metal. My son, David, answered softly, "Don't make it sound like that. We're doing what's best for him. He can't manage those places alone." For a moment, I didn't breathe. The hallway around me seemed to shrink until I could hear nothing but the air humming in my ears. They were talking about the 2 apartments my brother left me. The last thing Daniel ever said before the heart attack was, "You'll know what to do with them." I thought I did, but maybe Daniel had known better. That the real inheritance wouldn't be the apartments, but the test that came with them. Should have stepped out and confronted them, but instead I stood still like a man watching the last good light slip under a door. "We can make it look like it was his decision," Emily whispered. "We'll talk to a realtor Monday." That was enough. I pulled the coat onto the rack and deliberately rattled the hangers, loud enough for them to know I was there. Everything. "Okay in there?" I called, keeping my voice steady. There was a quick shuffle of feet and the sound of a TV turning up too late. "Yeah, Dad! Just talking about Thanksgiving plans." I walked into the living room. Both of them were smiling, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Good," I said, forcing a grin. Because I was thinking of making an announcement that day, their smiles faltered, just a flicker, like candles, realizing there's wind in the room. That night I sat at the kitchen table with the lamp on and Daniel's old cigar box in front of me. Inside were the apartment deeds, the will, and a photo of the 2 of us in front of the bakery he'd bought back in '92. He was holding a hammer, I was holding coffee. We looked like the kind of men who believed time was endless. I opened the will again, though I knew every line. "To my brother, because you know the weight of a key." "I do, Daniel. I know it now more than ever. Keys aren't just for doors. They're for trust. For promises you keep even when no one else remembers they were made." I turned the keys in my hand until they clicked together like small bells. Then I slipped them back into the box and whispered, "I'm still holding them, brother. For now." The next morning, the air was sharp enough to bite. I drove to Maple Street, the first apartment. Daniel always said that building was stubborn. It leaned a little to the east, like it was eavesdropping on gossip. The bakery downstairs was already open. The smell of bread and sugar reminded me that not every kind of warmth comes from people. Mrs. Rivera, the tenant upstairs, opened the door with tired eyes and a smile that tried anyway. "Mr. Anderson," she said, wiping flour from her hands. "I'm sorry about your brother. He was a good man." "He was?" I said. "He believed rent should never hurt." She nodded, then hesitated. "He told me once, a roof is a promise, not an investment." I never forgot that. Neither had I. She showed me the little things that needed fixing, a faucet that wouldn't stop crying, a closet door that sighed every time it opened. I took notes, told her I'd send someone by. From her window, I could see the bus stop, the bakery sign below, and a thin slice of river light threading through the buildings. It looked like the world still knew how to breathe. When I left, I touched the doorframe where Daniel had carved his initials, a tiny D.A. My brother believed in leaving marks, not for vanity, but to say, I stood here. I cared. The second apartment was by the river. I parked under the cracked oak that used to shade his pickup truck. The young couple renting it had taped a postcard to the door. Thank you for keeping rent steady while we figure out daycare. I smiled at that. Daniel would have loved it. The balcony creaked when I stepped onto it. From there, I could see the old bridge, a fisherman with his line trembling in the current, and two ducks arguing over bread. Life keeps moving, I thought, even when we stop. I stayed there a long while, letting the wind fill the silence Daniel left behind. By evening, I was back home. My house smelled like dust and loneliness, a combination that doesn't leave when children do. I boiled water for tea. I wouldn't finish and stared at the empty chair across from me. For a while I tried to remember the last time my children laughed with me, without checking their phones between sentences. I couldn't. That realization hurt more than the whisper, so I did what I always do when life feels heavier than my bones. I wrote. On a blank index card, I scribbled 3 lines. Homes are for shelter. Money is for mercy. People are for love. I tucked the card into my wallet behind Daniel's photograph. His face was younger there, eyes full of ideas that had already forgiven the world. Before I went to bed, I rehearsed how I'd tell my kids. Thanksgiving dinner, warm table, laughter. I'd stand and say, "Your uncle left us more than apartments. He left us a chance to keep goodness alive." Maybe they'd understand, maybe they wouldn't. Still, I believed people could return to themselves, the way rivers find their beds after storms. I fell asleep with that thought. But dreams aren't safe anymore when you live with doubt under your roof. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains like it was trying too hard. My phone buzzed, a message from Emily. "Dad, don't forget your doctor's appointment Tuesday." I didn't have one, but I didn't reply. Instead, I drove to the diner on Plum Street, the one Daniel loved. Checkered floor, the waitress with hair like honeycomb. I ordered his usual black coffee, eggs over hard. While I ate, I caught myself staring at the empty booth across from me. For a second, I almost saw him sitting there, smirking. "You're quiet today," he said in my mind. "Too quiet," I muttered. "Even my own walls are plotting." The waitress looked up, puzzled. "You say something, hun?" "Just talking to an old ghost," I smiled. Later, I drove to the park by the lake where Daniel and I used to skip stones. The water was low, the bench worn, but it was the only place I still heard him clearly. I took the keys from my pocket, held them over the water, and said, "You trusted me, brother. I won't let your kindness be traded." A gust of wind nearly pushed them from my hand. I caught them, clenched tight, heart pounding like I'd just caught a falling promise. "Not yet," I whispered. When I got home, I called both kids, invited them for brunch on Saturday. I needed to see their eyes again, see if guilt had planted anything in them. Saturday came cold and blue. The diner smelled like syrup and second chances. Emily and David arrived 5 minutes apart, pretending they hadn't coordinated it. We talked about little things first: weather, traffic, some neighbor's new dog. I waited until the plates were cleared before I said it. "Your uncle left," Me both apartments, I told them, and I'm keeping them as they are, for now. David set his fork down too slowly. Emily blinked twice before forcing a smile. Dad, that's wonderful, she said. But maybe you shouldn't carry all that responsibility. We could help. Handle the paperwork, maybe talk to a realtor. I don't need a realtor, I said gently. I need time. And I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing, David sighed. We're just worried about you. I know, I said. But sometimes worry looks an awful lot like control. For a second, the table went still. Then I smiled again, light enough to pass for forgiveness. When the bill came, I paid before they could reach for it. At the register, I dropped a few folded bills into the jar marked Community Pantry Fund. What's that for? David asked. For roofs, I said. For promises. On the walk back to the car, Emily hugged me tighter than usual. Her perfume smelled like lilies, the same scent her mother wore the day we buried Daniel. You know we love you, right? She said. I know, I told her. Let's show it, not just say it. They nodded, both looking at the ground. When I got home that evening, an empty envelope sat on my kitchen counter. Printed on it were the words Bright Haven Assisted Living. I hadn't brought it there. I sat down, stared at the envelope until the light outside turned the windows gold. Maybe that's the thing about family. They can love you and still plan your disappearance in the same breath. I slid the envelope into Daniel's cigar box beside the keys. You'd laugh at this, brother, I said aloud. But I'm still standing. Then I whispered something for myself. Let them whisper. I'll still choose kindness, but I won't be fooled. If this story already reached a place inside you and the part that remembers loyalty, love, and quiet betrayal, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep telling the stories our hearts still need. Sunday mornings used to mean quiet coffee and church bells in the distance. Now they sound like ticking clocks counting down to disappointment. I was fixing a loose cabinet hinge when the phone rang. The caller ID said Emily, home. Dad, we're stopping by later, she said. Don't cook. We'll bring something. Her voice was bright, too bright, like a lamp turned up to hide the cracks in the wall. After she hung up, I stood in the kitchen, the screwdriver still in my hand, realizing I'd been scheduled for a meeting I hadn't agreed to attend. They arrived an hour before sunset. Emily carried a white binder pressed against her chest. David had his polite smile ready, the kind you wear before asking for something. Hey, Dad, David said. Thought we'd catch up. They set takeout on the counter, lasagna, the peace offering of modern families. We sat at the table where my brother and I used to play cards. Emily opened the binder and spun it toward me. Tabs, charts, color-coded pages, professional concern, wrapped in family care. We did some research, she began. This shows what the apartments are worth after taxes, after fees. If we list both, you'd have enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. I studied the pages. Someone had printed photos of the buildings, Daniel's work reduced to glossy rectangles. Comfortably, I repeated. That's a strange word. People die chasing it and forget to live. David leaned forward. Dad, we're not saying you can't handle things. We just think managing tenants, collecting rent, it's a lot. Lot of what? I asked. Lot of life? Lot of meaning? He blinked, not used to those kinds of answers. Emily touched my arm. We're just worried about you being alone. What if something happens and we're not there? Her hand was soft, her nails perfectly done, the little details of someone who plans even her love. I appreciate that, I said. But what you're really worried about is not being there soon enough to decide what's left. There was a silence so long it almost became another person in the room. I remember Daniel at 50 saying, "Every family has two versions. The one you eat dinner with, and the one that meets in whispers when you leave the room." It seemed mine had become the latter. Emily finally exhaled. "Dad, please, we're not trying to take anything from you." "I know," I said. "You're trying to take care of me." Sometimes they look the same. She looked down at the binder. "We even found a few senior communities, beautiful places. There's one near the lake, Bright Haven." The name made my stomach tighten. "I've seen their brochure," I said quietly. "It was on my counter last night." David froze. "We must have. Maybe it fell out of the packet." "Don't," I said. "Let's not rehearse the lie." He lowered his eyes, and for a second I saw the boy who used to cry when he broke something. I wanted to forgive them right there, but forgiveness without understanding is like painting over mold. It looks good for a week, then smells worse. "Tell." "Me?" I asked softly. "Did you talk about this plan with anyone else? A lawyer? A realtor?" David hesitated. "Just exploring options." "Exploring my future like real estate?" Emily's voice cracked. "Dad, why are you making this sound ugly?" "Because it is," I said, but gently. "The way truth hurts least. You think love is planning for what happens after me. I think love is showing up while I'm still here." The room felt smaller after that. David closed the binder. The plastic rings clicked like handcuffs. "We'll drop it for now," he muttered. "We just wanted to help." "I know," I said again. "You always mean well. That's why I'm scared. You'll sell my kindness before you realize it's the only thing that matters." After they left, I made tea and sat at the same table, staring at the outline their elbows had left in the dust. I wanted to cry, but age teaches you to store tears for emergencies. I reached for Daniel's cigar box, took out the old ledger. Inside were his scribbles. "Mrs. R. Skip rent this month, son sick. River apt. Replace railing, safety first." Between the numbers, he'd written something in pencil. "Measure twice, cut once. Love first, count later." I traced the words with my thumb. It felt like he was still teaching me. I spent the next morning doing what my children wouldn't understand, repairing, not selling. A handyman came to fix Mrs. Rivera's faucet. I held the ladder while he tightened. Bolts on the river balcony. It wasn't about maintenance. It was about belonging. When we finished, he asked, "How old's this place?" "Old enough to remember when people built things to last," I said. He laughed. "Not many do that anymore." "No," I answered. "But some of us still try." Home! I made another index card. This time I added a fourth line beneath the three from before. Boundaries are also love. I taped it to the refrigerator where I'd see it every morning, right next to the picture of my kids when they were small. Missing teeth, chocolate on their cheeks, innocence too honest to plan anything. Looking at that photo, I whispered, "Come back, little ones. I'd trade all these keys to meet you again." That night, the phone rang again. David. "Dad, about earlier, we didn't mean to upset you." "I know," I said. "And I didn't mean to embarrass you." Silence stretched. Then softly, he added, "We'll talk again on Thanksgiving." "Yes," I said. "We will." After he hung up, I stood by the window. Outside, the streetlights hummed, rain tapping against the glass, like someone asking for forgiveness, but too proud to say the words. I pressed my palm to the cold pane and murmured, "Maybe this is what family becomes, a conversation held through glass." Later that week, I wrote letters, one to Emily, one to David. Not accusations, just memories. How Emily used to tuck her dolls under Daniel's workbench when we visited. How David once called a thunderstorm God's camera. I ended both letters with the same line. If love ever starts sounding like paperwork, stop talking and start listening. I didn't mail them. Some truths need to breathe before they travel. Gentle pause. If you're listening, and this story feels a little too familiar, if you've ever had to remind someone that caring isn't the same as controlling, please tap that like button. It helps these stories reach people who still believe love can be kind and firm. Thursday came grey and quiet. I walked to the river again. The fisherman was gone. In his place, a boy skipping stones with his father. I watched them for a while, then turned away. Maybe that's what Daniel meant about the weight of a key. It's not what it opens, it's what it keeps closed until the right moment. I slid my hand into my pocket, felt the cool metal, and whispered, "Not yet, brother, not yet." That evening I started a small list titled Thanksgiving Plan. Tell them the truth gently. Keep the apartments. Leave each child something money can't buy. Invite Mrs. Rivera and the River family for dessert. Because gratitude doesn't work unless it's shared. I went to bed with a strange peace. Not the kind that comes from winning, but the kind that comes from choosing the right side of yourself. Thanksgiving week came with the kind of sky that forgets its own color. A tired grey pressed over the town like someone had thrown a blanket over the sun. I'd always loved this season, the smell of pie crust, the comfort of sweaters, the way people remembered to say thank you out loud. But that year, the air carried something else. A whisper I still couldn't shake. I kept wondering what other words my children had spoken after I walked away that night. The ones I hadn't heard. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I drove to the River apartment again. The young couple who lived there, Sarah and Mike, were hanging garlands on the balcony railing, the baby gurgling in a stroller between them. Sarah waved. "Mr. Anderson, we're decorating early this year." I smiled. "The world needs a little early kindness." Mike handed me a mug of cocoa. "We fixed the balcony bolts. Didn't charge you. Figured your brother would have done it himself." That sentence almost undid me. Your brother would have done it himself. Daniel was still alive in strangers' sentences. Back home, I found an envelope slid under my door. No stamp, no handwriting, just my name, Frank, typed neatly. In the center, inside was a folded page torn from a realtor's binder, a property valuation for Maple Street Apartments, potential market sale. There was no signature, but I knew the font. Emily's office printer used the same one. My hands shook. I sat down slowly, as if gravity had just remembered me. Later that night, I heard the soft thud of a car door outside. I pulled the curtain an inch. Emily's silver sedan was parked across the street. David stepped out from the passenger side, holding a phone to his ear. The cold wind carried their voices through the crack in my window. "We have to do it before he changes his mind," Emily said. "The realtor said the offers drop after. New Year, we'll tell him it's for tax reasons." David sighed. "I don't like this." "He'll thank us later," she answered. "Dad's too emotional. We're being practical." I don't remember closing the curtain, but I remember my chest tightening until I could hear my heartbeat in my teeth. Practical. That's the word people use when love gets tired. I sat down on the edge of my bed, Daniel's coat draped over the chair. "Seems they learned business better than we did, brother," I whispered. The coat didn't answer, but the silence did, and it was heavy enough to bend me forward. The next morning, I drove aimlessly for hours. the kind of drive that doesn't have a destination, just motion. I passed the church, the library, the corner store where Daniel once argued with a clerk about the price of nails. Everything looked smaller, like the world had exhaled and forgotten to inhale again. At a red light, I saw a sign for Safe Hands Home Care. The name made me smile, not for what it sold, but for the words themselves. Safe hands, that's all any of us ever want at the end. I turned the corner and headed toward Maple Street. Mrs. Rivera was at her window watering plants. She waved me in. "Come in, Mr. Anderson. I made soup." Her apartment smelled of thyme and purpose. I sat while she ladled soup into a chipped bowl and talked about her night shifts at the hospital. She didn't know she was saving me, just by being ordinary. When I left, she pressed a small envelope into my hand. Inside was a note that read, "Your brother said these walls listen. If they ever start whispering wrong things, remind them who built them." It was Daniel's handwriting, faded but alive. I looked around the apartment. Every shelf, every nail, every scratch on the paint. His work. And now my children wanted to sell it like an old piece of furniture. That evening, I called David. He answered on the second ring.
"Dad, meet me tomorrow at the diner," I said. "Just you." A pause. "Sure. Everything okay?" "Let's find out." The diner was nearly empty when he arrived. A grey coat, cautious eyes, guilt trailing behind him like smoke.
He slid into the booth across from me. "Coffee?" I asked. He nodded. For a moment, we just listened to the hiss of the espresso machine. Finally, I said, "I know about the plan." He froze. "Emily!" I heard both of you. Twice. He looked down. "Dad, it's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I said softly. "You want to take care of me by taking away what keeps me alive." He rubbed his temple. "We were scared. You've been forgetful. You
"Called me Daniel last week." I smiled faintly.
That wasn't forgetfulness, that was longing." He swallowed. "We just want to make sure you're safe." "Safe is good," I said. "But safe isn't always alive." He looked at me, really looked, for the first time in months.
And I saw confusion mix with remorse. "I didn't mean to—" "I know," I interrupted. "Neither did I when I raised children who confuse control with compassion." He leaned back, tears threatening. "We thought you'd be proud. You always said plan ahead." "I did," I said, "but not at the cost of people." I tapped the table between us.
"These keys your uncle left, they're not just metal. They're stories still being lived. You can't sell that." He nodded slowly, voice cracking. "I'll talk to Emily." "Do that," I said. But not as a brother trying to convince, as a son trying to understand. After he left, I stayed at the diner long enough for the waitress to refill my coffee twice. I watched the steam rise and fade, like everything we think we own. When I got home, I found another envelope on my doorstep. This one handwritten. Inside was a single photo, Emily and David at the realtor's office, sitting across from a man in a suit. No note, no explanation, just proof. Someone, maybe the universe, maybe Daniel, wanted me to see. That night I did something I hadn't done in years. I went down to the basement. The air smelled like old wood and stubborn memories. In the corner stood Daniel's workbench covered with tools still marked by his fingerprints. I ran my hand across the dust, whispering, "You'd know what to do, wouldn't you?" The silence answered again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt like a nudge. I found an unfinished wooden box on the bench. Inside was a folded note, sealed with wax. The wax had cracked, but the words were clear. For Frank. When love becomes noise, listen to the quiet ones. I sat there a long time, holding that note like it was oxygen. When morning came, I called my lawyer, Mr. Green. He'd known Daniel, too. Frank, he said, we can add stipulations to the deed if you're worried about premature sales.
I don't want paperwork, I said. I want purpose. He paused. Then maybe you should create something that lasts longer than signatures. That line stayed with me all day. Something that lasts longer than signatures. So I drove back
To Maple Street. Mrs. Rivera was leaving for work, uniform neatly pressed. Do you trust me? I asked her. She smiled, puzzled. Yes, sir. Would you help me honor my brother's memory? Always, she said. I handed her a small envelope. Inside is a year of rent, paid in advance. Use it to start something when the time's right. A bakery of your own, maybe. Her eyes widened. Mr. Anderson, Well, don't thank me, I said. Thank the man who built this roof. I'm just keeping it upright. Driving home, I felt Daniel's presence beside me. That steady calm he carried everywhere. He used to say, we're not remembered by what we save, but by what we share before it's too late. I think I finally understood. At home, I pulled out a blank sheet of paper and began to write a new kind of will. Not for the lawyer, but for life itself. It began, to whoever reads this when I'm gone, don't sell what was meant to shelter others. Keep roofs for rain and hearts for trust. By the time I finished, the sun had set, but I didn't turn on the light. Some truths look better in half-darkness. Softly. If this part of the story stirred something inside you, the need to protect what love once built, please like this video. It helps these stories travel to people who still believe kindness can be fierce. That night, as I climbed into bed, I heard rain again. But it didn't sound lonely this time. It sounded like applause, soft, steady, approving. I closed my eyes and whispered, I'm listening, brother. I'm finally listening. For 3 nights after the diner talk, sleep stayed away like a cautious guest. I'd lie in bed listening to the wind pull at the gutters, wondering if Daniel's ghosts were tugging to remind me that nothing worth keeping ever comes easy. The coffee pot grew tired of me before dawn. Each morning, I'd walk the hallway, touching the framed photos the way one checks a pulse, making sure the past was still breathing. My children hadn't called. Maybe they needed time to gather excuses. Maybe I needed silence to decide what kind of father finishes his story. On the 3rd evening, an envelope slid under the door again. This time, only a single sheet of notebook paper. No valuation, no numbers. Emily's handwriting. Dad, I'm sorry I hurt you. We didn't mean to sound greedy. I miss Mom. I think I started planning because it's the only thing that makes me feel in control. We'll come on Thursday if you'll have us. No signature. Just a drawing of a small house and 2 stick figures under a roof. One had grey hair. It wasn't art. It was confession. I pressed the note to my chest until the paper went soft. Control. That was the real currency of love, wasn't it? We spend our lives trying to buy safety with certainty, but the exchange rate is always heartbreak. Thursday arrived with frost webbing the windows and a sky too pale to promise anything. I cleaned the house twice, polished the brass plaque on the mantel, and placed Daniel's coat over the empty chair at the table. Not as decoration, more as witness. The doorbell rang at noon. David first, carrying a basket that smelled of fresh bread and regret.
Emily behind him, hair pinned but eyes unguarded. No binder, no brochures, only a box of lilies. "Hi, Dad," she whispered. "Hi, kids," I answered. That word, kids, felt new in my mouth as if I'd just invented forgiveness. We cooked.
Together. Awkward at first. David burned the onions. Emily forgot to salt the potatoes. But laughter returned like an old dog that forgives the door it scratched. When we finally sat down, the turkey steamed between us, the air thick with all the sentences we'd postponed.
I waited until their plates were half empty. People listen better when they're chewing hope. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. "I was," I looked at Emily. "Not because you wanted to sell, but because you didn't think I still had something worth keeping." She looked down. "We thought we were saving you." "I know, but safety isn't the only way to love." David set down his fork. "Then what is, Dad?" I smiled. "Letting people try, even when you're scared they'll fail. That's the hardest kind of love. Your uncle taught me that with every crooked nail he refused to replace." Emily reached across the table, resting her fingers on my wrist. Her
Hand was small, trembling, but it held more honesty than any signature. "I'm listening," she said. "Sometimes that's the whole miracle. The other person finally means it." After dinner, I took them to the living room where Daniel's photo hung above the mantel. The firelight caught the brass plaque, D.A. "Do you know what else those letters stand for?" I asked. David guessed. "Daniel Anderson? Maybe. But to me they mean do allow," Emily frowned. "Allow what?" "Kindness, mistakes, time. Let things grow into what they mean." That's what Daniel believed. He never forced a door open. He waited for it to fit the hinge. The fire cracked softly, agreeing. We sat until the flames shrank into coals. David finally said, "Dad, what will you do with the apartments when it's time?" "I'll leave each of you one," I said, "but not to own, to keep running. The rent goes into a fund for tenants who fall behind. You don't collect profit, you collect stories. Deal?" Emily smiled through tears. "Deal." David nodded. "Best deal I've ever signed without paper." Later that night, when they'd left, I poured tea and stepped onto the porch. Snow had begun its slow rehearsal. Every flake landed like a yes from the sky. The town lights shimmered across the river. The bakery's window still glowed warm. I could almost see Mrs. Rivera wiping the counter, the baby next door learning to clap. Life continuing exactly as Daniel designed it. I thought of my children, driving home, headlights slicing the dark, maybe replaying every word we'd traded. Forgiveness travels slower than cars, but it always arrives. The next morning brought a small miracle. David returned, hammer in hand, to fix the loose railing.
On my porch without being asked.
He worked quietly while I brewed coffee. When he finished, he turned to me. "You were right, Dad. Boundaries are love. They keep people from falling." "Good rails make good sons," I said, and he laughed. Sunday evening, Emily came by with a folder. My stomach clenched until I saw what was inside. Photographs of the apartments, Mrs. Rivera smiling, the river couple decorating, even the baby's new toy bear. She'd written captions beneath each one. "Still home, still hope." She placed the folder on the table. "Maybe this can be our new binder," she said. "The kind that keeps instead of sells." I hugged her for the first time in years, without counting seconds. Her hair smelled like lilies and relief. In December, we held a small gathering for the tenants. Hot cocoa, cookies, too many mismatched chairs. I watched Emily pour cocoa for Mrs. Rivera while David fixed the string lights. Children ran through the hallways. their laughter colliding with the smell of cinnamon and new paint. It felt like the buildings themselves were breathing easier. A reporter from the local paper stopped by. Some neighbor must have told them. He asked, "What's the secret to keeping old places alive?" I said, "Don't treat them like property. Treat them like promises." He smiled, scribbled it down, and I realized Daniel would have loved that line. When everyone left, I locked the doors and stood outside under the street lamp. The frost on the brass numbers shimmered like quiet applause. I whispered, "Thank you, brother. You built walls strong enough for hearts to echo." Weeks later, a letter arrived addressed simply to Mr. Anderson, keeper of keys. Inside, a drawing made by Sarah's baby, scribbles really, crayon circles that could have been suns or pies or halos. Below it, Sarah had written, "He says this. Is you opening the door?" I pinned the drawing to my refrigerator beside the index card. Now it read, "Homes, money, people, boundaries, forgiveness. Doors, stay open when hearts do. That winter was harsh, but peace makes good insulation." Emily and David visited every week. Sometimes we said nothing at all, just drank coffee while the heater hummed its steady hymn. Other nights we read old letters from their mother, and the air grew heavy with gratitude instead of grief. On Christmas Eve, Emily handed me a small wooden box. It was the one Daniel had left unfinished on his workbench. They had sanded it, polished it, and carved on the lid, "For Dad," the quiet one. Who finally spoke, inside was nothing but a folded piece of paper, with my own handwriting, the life will I'd written weeks earlier. They had found it and returned it. "Keep this," Emily said. "It belongs to the living." That night I placed the box beside Daniel's photo, not as an ending, but as a companion. Snow fell steady outside. The world looked forgiven. Before going to bed, I sat at my desk and recorded one last note for whoever might find my stories someday. If you are hearing this, remember, wealth isn't what you leave behind. It's what you keep alive while you still can. Be a caretaker, not a collector. Measure twice, cut once. Love first, count later. I saved the file, labeled it Maple Street, Epilogue, and smiled. Daniel would have teased me for using technology to preach carpenter wisdom. But I think he would have approved. In the quiet that followed, I realized the strangest truth of all. You can forgive people completely and still not return to the same house you left. Forgiveness rebuilds, but it rearranges the floor plan. And maybe that's how every family survives. New walls, same foundation. I turned off the lamp. Through the window, the river reflected the first moon of the new year. I whispered, "We're good now, brother. The roofs are still promises." And the night answered by staying kind. Gentle outro cue, voice soft. If this story reminded you of family, of forgiveness, or of something you still need to fix, please like this video and subscribe. It helps these memories keep someone else warm tonight.